Throughout history, there have been people who have committed some of the most heinous crimes fathomable. For those crimes, they have been convicted and sentenced to death. Welcome to Death Row Executions, where we take a look into the lives of society's worst offenders. And now, your host, Air.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the 63rd episode of Death Row Executions. Today's story is on America's first police officer to be sentenced to death. In 1855, with Castle Gardens in New York becoming the first official immigrant receiving station, many Europeans were settling in America and having children that would be first-generation Americans. Over the next few decades, over 8 million immigrants from Europe had made the big move, which included the parents of Charles Becker, who emigrated from Germany. The move was made a little easy with the help of the U.S. government, who assisted many families and offered boarding houses and labor exchange programs. Finally, on July 26, 1870, Charles Becker was born in Sullivan County, New York. He was child number 6 out of 10 children altogether, and growing up, not only was becoming a police officer enticing, but the street life was as well. He was known for being bigger than the average guy, with hands so big it was said that they looked like hammers. At the age of 20, he moved away from his family to New York City in the hopes of making money and got his first job working as a baker. The baker job did not last long, and he soon started a new job as a bouncer at a German bar. 3 years later, in November of 1893, Charles met corrupt politician Big Time Sullivan. Big Time Sullivan was in charge at Tammany Hall, and he let Charles know that he could get him in the police force if he had the right kind of money. Charles saved $250, which was a third of the annual salary he would be making, and after giving it to Big Time Sullivan, Charles was now an official police officer with the New York City Police Department. The new uniform did not change who Charles was as a person, and he quickly became known as a crooked cop. He was a highly intelligent man, but instead of using his brain, he would use his brawn. He had a fixation on prostitutes and would often beat them up and take their money without any repercussions. At most, all he would get was a slap on the wrist. Now, 1896, 3 years after he joined the force, Charles spotted a prostitute by the name of Ruby Young. She was walking on Broadway with famous author Stephen Crane and 2 choir girls. Charles came up to Ruby, physically assaulted her, and then arrested her for soliciting sex. Upset by the false accusation, Stephen attended Ruby's hearing, which was the day after she was arrested. He testified on Ruby's behalf, and the judge presiding over the case had the case dismissed. Due to Stephen's popularity and the scandal around what happened, media was all over the case, and Stephen was quoted saying to reporters, "If the girl will have the officer prosecuted for perjury, I will gladly support her." A month after the case was dismissed, Stephen was unable to let go of his anger towards Charles, so he formally filed charges against him. The trial for Charles began on October 15, 1896, and this is when he gained confidence and learned that with his badge, he would be able to get away with anything. In the months leading up to his trial, the New York City Police Commissioner at the time was none other than Theodore Roosevelt, and not only did he support Charles, making it known that he believed Charles was acting as a professional policeman, but he reprimanded Stephen for testifying on behalf of a prostitute. Charles knew he lied under oath against Ruby Young, but for his trial, he was surrounded and supported by many powerful men within the police force. 18th President of the United States, Ulysses S. Grant, had a son by the name of Frederick Dent Grant, who was commissioner along with Theodore Roosevelt and headed the trial. After 5 hours, Charles Becker was acquitted. Charles was happy, loving life, and married a woman by the name of Mary Becker, but she died from tuberculosis about 8 months after they married. He quickly moved on and married a Canadian woman by the name of Letitia Stenson, and the two had their son, Howard Becker, who was born in 1899. In 1904, the couple divorced, and Letitia married a brother of Charles and moved west, taking Howard with her. Not fazed by the split, Charles met a new woman by the name of Helen Becker, and they soon married. His wife was an honest woman working as a school teacher, and she was blind to how corrupt her husband really was. Charles was working in an area where there were street gangs, theaters, brothels, gambling dens, and hotels. The streets were busy, and policemen in the area were known for being easily bribed. Charles's superiors were making more money than him on bribes, but this soon changed when he was promoted to sergeant in 1907, 2 years after he married Helen. Instead of obsessing over hookers, he became a bagman for his police chief, Captain Max Schmidberger, in the area of Tenderloin. Charles was assigned the task of collecting dirty money from the brothels and gambling clubs, giving it to Captain Max, and for this, Charles would get a 10% cut. By 1911, Captain Max got busted, and the force was unable to protect him, so he was relieved from his job and charged with corruption. Charles took his position and took control of every dirty business in the Tenderloin area. One of the most popular gangs of the underworld during that time in that area was the EASTMAN gang. The founder of the EASTMAN gang, Monk Eastman, was locked up in prison, so a man by the name of Jack Zelig took control and became the new leader of the gang. His relationship with Charles grew, and Charles had designated Jack to be his hitman and his muscle for putting people in line who gave Charles any issues. Over a very short period of time, Charles was able to extort over $100,000 from all of the businesses in town. To keep people on his side, Charles would share this money with other policemen and politicians. One man Charles was frequently getting money from was Herman Rosenthal. Herman was a bookie who owned multiple illegal casinos, with one of them being the fancy 3-story Hesper Club. Herman was tired of handing out money to Charles and decided enough was enough. One day, he refused to pay, and instead of having his goons beat Herman up, Charles took a visit to the club himself. Once inside, he pushed Herman into a wall, and according to Annals of Crime, Charles said, "I fix payoffs in New York. You either pay me or die." On another day, Charles ordered a police raid at one of Herman's clubs, and the policemen left a significant amount of damage. Instead of backing down and giving in, Herman decided to fight and made an official complaint against Charles Becker. Herman went to anyone who would listen, including the press, letting them know that Charles was a crooked cop who collected 20% of everything his casinos made. By July of 1912, Charles was printed in the New York World newspaper, along with 2 other senior police officials, about extorting money from Herman. When Charles got wind of the chaos Herman was causing, he spoke to gang member Jack Zelig and told him he wanted Herman croaked. Trial began, and Herman was supposed to testify in court in front of a grand jury on July 16, 1912. In order to prevent Herman from testifying, Jack spoke with 2 gamblers, Bald Jack Rose and Harry Vallon, and they told him that Herman would be at the Hotel Metropole off Times Square. Lefty Louie, Whitey Lewis, Dago Frank, and Gyp the Blood drove to the hotel, and it was around 2 o'clock in the morning. They were waiting in their car, and as Herman was walking out of the hotel, one of the thugs yelled out, "Over here, Herman." It was pretty dark, and Herman was unable to identify the voice or see who had called him, so he replied by shouting out, "Who's that?" He stepped out into the street and was immediately met with 5 bullets that hit his neck, nose, and head. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Soon to be governor of New York, Charles S. Whitman, who was acting as district attorney, made it known that Herman was killed under Charles Becker's request. Citizens of New York City spoke up and out against Charles, so the force was pressured to strip him of his title, and he was assigned desk duty in the Bronx. A day after the murder, the men who killed Herman went out to enjoy the day, and here is a picture of them on that day after they had a picnic. Charles thought he was off the hook for the murder, but unbeknownst to him, Charles Whitman and his colleagues continued to investigate the murder. On July 29, 1912, Charles was finally arrested at his job. The judge presiding over the trial was Judge John Goff, and he had ill feelings towards Charles Becker. Many felt that he was biased, and he ultimately convicted Charles of first-degree murder and sentenced him to death. Charles tried his best to have a different outcome, and even went as far as to ordering the murder of Jack Zelig, the EASTMAN gang leader who formed the small crew to kill Herman. Despite Jack being dead and unable to testify against Charles Becker, it did not change the outcome of the first trial. Charles did appeal his case, and it was overturned due to the fact that they indeed did believe that Judge Goff was biased and there was no evidence to prove that Charles was involved in murdering Herman. The court ordered a retrial, and while he was awaiting trial, he and his wife Helen had a baby girl named Charlotte Becker, who was born in 1913, but she died less than 24 hours after she was born. That same year, the men who killed Herman were separately tried and convicted, and were all executed on April 14, 1913. The following year, in 1914, the retrial began. Charles went on stand, and in his own words said, "Sure, I told them to put Rosenthal out of the way, but I didn't mean they should kill him. I wanted them to get him out of town so he wouldn't blab. Killing him was Rose's idea and the others. They wanted to save their own skins." With a new judge and jury, Charles Becker was convicted of murder on May 22, 1914, and it was the first reconviction in the city's history. Charles was emotionless then and again on July 16, 1914, when he received his sentence of death. He had filed many appeals, which were all denied, and his last hope was to get a pardon from the governor himself. This also made history because it was the first time a district attorney had become a governor and had the power to pardon a criminal he prosecuted. This man was none other than the district attorney Charles Whitman, and in November of 1914, he had become governor of New York. Pleading to him was also Helen Becker. She met with him personally and cried to him while expressing herself. "Governor, I know Charlie is no saint, but he is not the foul murderer he has been branded." Charles Whitman shook his head no and replied by telling her, "I want you to feel free to tell me everything. If there is anything that you think would help your husband, or that I should know, you may tell it to me with the fullest assurance that it will be absolutely confidential." Helen then replied by telling him there was nothing to tell. With no new evidence to prove his innocence, Charles Becker was not given a pardon by Governor Whitman. Governor Whitman was not persuaded by Becker's supporters, nor was he moved by Becker's final letter to him that read, "I am innocent as you of having murdered Herman Rosenthal, or having counseled, procured, or aided his murder, or having any knowledge of that dreadful crime." The execution of Charles Becker was set for July 30th, 1915, at the Sing Sing prison in New York. The night before his execution, prison officials said he ate normal prison dinner and his appetite was not affected. He was given a cigar to smoke, and the prison officials noticed how calm he appeared, and Charles responded by saying, "What can I do? I've got to face it, haven't I?" It was 5:30 a.m. on July 30th, 1915, and Charles walked to the execution room unrestrained. He was strapped into the electric chair, and for his last words he said, "Into thy hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit." After he was done speaking, it was time, and he was shocked with 2,000 volts. Officials underestimated the voltage and Charles's strength, so after the first botched shock, Charles was still alive. He was shocked for a second time, but it was still too low to have completed the job. Reporters and witnesses were dismayed, with a few even fainting because they were unable to stomach what they were witnessing. More prison officials were called in to assist, his straps were tightened, and the voltage was increased yet again. For them, the third time was the charm because it finally worked after 9 minutes of struggles and failed attempts. Charles was buried at the Woodlawn Cemetery next to his baby girl who passed away, and angered by her husband not being pardoned, Helen had a nameplate made for her husband's coffin that read, "Murdered by Governor Whitman." Over 5,000 people convened at the Becker house, which included many people from the police force, and they had the nameplate removed before Charles was officially buried. Thank you all for watching another episode of Death Row Executions, and if you enjoyed this video or made it to the end, please give the video a like for me and leave a comment in the comment section below because it helps with YouTube recommending the video. Also, if you would like to support the channel in a different way, there will be a link to my Patreon in the description box below.